Kumar up there, along with the rest of the people in the team. So I'd like to set the stage for what I'm going to discuss with European Indology, because that's the starting point for some of the distortions, erasures, the errors and devaluation of Indic sources that have persisted to the current date. So I've just picked out 2 or 3 names that I have encountered, and I'm going to quickly breeze through this because I have so much to talk. 3 names pop out. One, William Jones. He was the founder of the Asiatic Society. He used a distorted Puranic genealogy to construct the history of India. The Puranic genealogy goes to 5,000 years. He opted to take just 1,800 years out of that genealogy and introduce the first set of distortions in the history of India. Max Muller, almost everybody might be familiar with him in this audience. So he proposed linguistic analysis on the Sanskrit used in the Vedas, and he decided to date it to some dates that he felt was correct, in the first millennium BCE. John Bentley was an amazing scholar. He was a very intelligent man, mathematician, astronomer, and so on. But he used all of his energy to only criticize the Hindu astronomy to show that, in what he said, he claimed to show that they were forgeries, they were modern forgeries. They couldn't have been as ancient as the data in that suggests, and he said that they were all modern forgeries. So there are several games. They didn't think of it as games then. Back then, I'm sure they were perfectly clear-headed when they were doing these things. William Jones, Bentley, and other 18th century British, they had to reconcile the Hindu accounts of history in the Puranas and the astronomical verses they found, along with the biblical beliefs which they subscribed to. They were Anglican Church people, the Church of England, and they had to, at that period of time, they subscribed to a 4004 BCE creation date, and they subscribed to a belief in Noah's deluge. And there couldn't have been any history prior to the flood because God had destroyed the entire world by the flood and only Noah had survived. Therefore, any history should antedate the Noah's flood. Because of that, Jones force-fed the 5,000-year span Purana king list to shorten chronology of 1800 years, and he sheet-anchored Chandragupta Maurya to Alexander's period. Bentley was unabashed with his belief system, where he was clear that Hindu history has got to be wrong because it doesn't tally with the biblical genealogies, and he was determined to show that they were all modern forgeries. So here's an example of a distortion. Almost all of us have encountered that Adi Shankara, where do we date him? Do we date into 788 current era, or do we date into 509 current BCE, or do we date into the 1800s BCE as the Puranas would have it? The problem with any kind of research that you go along over here is that sooner or later you're going to hit your head against walls that are being erected by Western Indologists. If you try to say that Adi Shankara lived in 509 BCE, then somebody is going to come along and say, then how could he have quoted Dharmakirti? Dharmakirti, having been a disciple, not a disciple, but a professor at Nalanda, was a Buddhist professor. How could he have quoted Dharmakirti? He should be later than Buddha and not earlier than Buddha. Now, if you see when Buddha was dated, William Jones dated him to 599 BCE, in flying in the face of the evidence that was there in the Puranas, in the Buddhist scriptures themselves that dated Buddha much earlier. So, our Puranas date Gautama Buddha to the 1800s BCE. I just gave this as an example that Indian sources are greatly compromised due to Western distortions that have unfortunately become canonical today, and people use these texts and talk about them. So each time somebody like me comes and talks, they say I'm smoking something. So it can't be correct. So here's a summary of Western Indology. Indian civilization is posterior to Sumerian, Egypt and Babylonian. It is composed of Aryans and Dravidians. The Indian civilization borrowed from Greek, Babylon, Egypt civilizations in science and math. And here is a very infamous quote by somebody you might recognize. All Indian books don't measure up to even one bookshelf of Victorian England. I guess you can recognize Macaulay's very, very scorching criticism over here. So I went back and said, so what did the Indians know? If this is how the Western Indologists are positioning us, what is the evidence that we have to show perhaps the world is otherwise? It's not the way they want to position us as. So the Indian knowledge sources we know, I shouldn't even be telling this to this audience, I'm scared to even open my mouth over here. But Shruti, that which is heard, the Vedas, the Samhitas, the Brahmanas, Aranyakas, Upanishads, these form the major bedrock of Indian knowledge. More sources, Smriti, that which is remembered, the 6 Vedangas, grammar, meter, astronomy, rituals, itihasas, the texts on dharma, artha, kama, moksha, the Puranas, Kavya, Bhashya, Sutras, and Shastras of various schools of philosophy, and the Nibandhas on politics, medicine, culture, arts. More about what Indians knew, we know that there have been a whole lot of schools and gurus of the past who have taught these 6, at least these 6 schools of thought in philosophies, Nyaya, Yoga, Vaisheshika, Samkhya, Purva Mimamsa, Uttara Mimamsa, and Vedanta. Each of these things, if we just take away just this one-line blurbs from each of these philosophies, it tells us clearly that this was a deeply scientific way of examining everything there is to Vidya and Avidya. The nature of Avidya, the nature of Vidya, and everything else, the huge matrix bedrock was provided by the ancients, within which we could find intellectual expression over the centuries to try and decide about the world that we live in, the nature of Brahman and our relationship to the world and the cosmos. So it's fairly clear to at least the students over here that there is an enormous body of knowledge that has come from the distant past, as well as practitioners and people who have written Bhashyas and Upanishads and commentaries down to even Vijayanagar period where Sayana was writing commentaries and so on. So we have a whole lot of intellectual expression in the medium of the Vedas, the Smritis and the Shrutis. So with that said, I try to answer the question. Since Western Indologists will position us as a recent people who have borrowed information from a lot of other cultures, who are we as a people? Given that the first evidence, we have got a lot of knowledge here doesn't gel well with what the Western Indologists say. So I tried to make a case for enormous antiquity of the Indian people. I'm answering the question, are we old or are we as recent as the so-called Aryan invasion theory? And so I'm going to talk about the genetic history of India. I have taken this work from Stephen Oppenheimer's work in 2003, where they use genetic research. The mechanism by which they do is they track the maternal mitochondrial DNA. Using that and the mutations therein, they try to study these in various populations. Supposing they were to take, let's say, about 100 people from this room from different parts of India and maybe outside India, and they try to see the genetic identification that we have and try to cluster the haplotypes. The haplotypes are genetic clusterings of some characteristics. I know I'm getting a little technical over here, but the bottom line is there are mechanisms where using blood or saliva or other things, they are able to get genetic traits that you have, and believe it or not, that your ancestors carried too, and how far back, going a distant time in the past. So by looking at the mutations that arose in the distant past, and the fact that each parent passed on copies of the mutations to the children, we are able to try and say who inherited what mutation and therefore which migration path might they have taken. So science is able to answer that question. So by that, there is the theory that the modern human being meaning Homo sapien, the same cranial capacity as you and me, they arose in Africa, and a crossing happened out of Africa 145,000 years ago. And they crossed this and walked into the triangular part of India and onward into this region that you can see. So between 85,000 years to 75,000 years ago, all the non-African people are descended from these groups of people. It is estimated that less than 1,000 families crossed over. Less than 1,000 families crossed over, and we bear the genetic affinity to these individuals. A couple of questions. What was the migration model? Why did they not head westwards? Why did they come eastwards? Now, in the time frame in question, there was another species of humans living here called Neanderthals. The range of the Neanderthals was up to Iran. And Iran, you have the Chagai Hills here that separates Pakistan from Iran, and that was a natural boundary where the Neanderthals did not come. Today the Homo sapien is big, like 6 feet and about 80 kg, 70 kg and so on, because of generations of nutrition has made us like this. But if you go back to 85,000 years ago, the human being was pretty puny. He was not as big as this. He was much smaller, much more puny and so on. So they feared the Neanderthals. So they had to hug the beach and get by. So that's why they did not head westwards. Next, what is the migration model? Did they say, hey, let's go to Australia, let's go to India? It is not at all anything like that. The nearest social model we have is the Bushman model. The Bushman does not have any possessions. He perhaps has a spear or a bow and arrow, his wife, his children, and perhaps the clothes that he's wearing. He doesn't have a house or anything like that, nothing to tie him to the land. He lives in one area where there is shelter, and when food is not available there, he'll just take his entire family and go 1 kilometer down the road and live where food is plentiful. Or if he doesn't like his neighbor because the neighbor is too noisy or something, he's not going to get into a fight. He'll just get up and go away another 1 kilometer. So that was the migration model, a generation by generation migration model. It never was, let's get out to Australia. So what you're seeing here is a generation by generation mode. The time frames are enormous here. We cannot even imagine 85,000 to 75,000. That's enough time for generations to reach over there. 74,000 years ago, there was a super volcano in called Mount Toba in Sumatra. That explosion was so big that it buried the whole of India and Pakistan with 5 meters deep of ash. And what happened is the human population plummeted down. There were less than 10,000 breeding individuals, just 10,000 individuals. And in the whole of the north, there was a nuclear winter. So life could not exist there. So the whole of life almost was extincted except for this very few people that we know. This picture here shows in Jwalapuram in Andhra Pradesh, where there is excavations going on even today, where they're finding the ash from this event, $74,000 a year event, and they're finding artifacts, ancient artifacts of the people who lived there under that ash. So it's amazing research is going on. This is a very, very recent picture. So about 65,000 to 52,000 years ago, something amazing happened. The ice ages ended and Europe warmed up. Once Europe warmed, it also coincided with the dying out of the Neanderthals. Remember the adversaries of the ancient human being, they died out. And so humans from this region of the world, which is Punjab, set out going towards Europe and became the future Europeans. So Europeans trace their lineage actually to the Punjab area over here, and genetics, you can't argue with it. This is what genetics tells you. So as you can see here, they moved through the Fertile Crescent and to the Levant, and they moved to Europe through the Bosphorus. Bosphorus is in Bulgaria and so on, and moved over there. Now about 40 to 25,000 years ago, more migration waves. There's one wave from Punjab area, one from the Sumerian area, and one from eastern India, and another from this area. These groups joined together and crossed the Bering Strait and became the future Native Americans. So the Red Indians were real Indians, if you think about it. This is the irony that genetics tells us. So they became the future Native Americans, and here migrations still continue to happen. So I'll stop at that point, and I've made a case now using genetics to show that the people in the Indian region were perhaps the most ancient people outside of the African continent. The population of the world happened from this group of individuals everywhere outside of Africa. This is what current genetics tells us. So here we are old, but what about the Aryan invasion theory? And so we need to fast forward to 12,000 to 5,000 years ago. I'd like to introduce two terminologies, one called ANI, Ancestral North Indian, and ASI, Ancestor South Indian. This is the terminology that is presented in this paper. This is a research paper in genetics, 2013, and they have genetic evidence for population mixture in India. I'm not going to read all these things. I'll just go to this picture over here. This paper says the ANI and ASI diverged from a common ancestor 60,000 years ago, which correlates very well with that migration record we talked about from Stephen Oppenheimer's work, that they came into India and so on. So this paper says that the North Indian and South Indian diverged from this common ancestor. They lived side by side for an exceedingly long period of time without mixing. Then something happened about 4,000 years ago. 4,000 years ago, these populations started mixing and marrying and so on. And about 2000 years ago, they stopped mixing, they became endogamous again. And they continued on to the present time. So this is an interesting slide from their work. And I think I missed one slide over here. I think I deleted one slide over here. The conclusion which they say is, there is no evidence of Aryan invasion theory or Aryan genes coming into the North Indian genetic pool anywhere from 12,000 years ago. So they say if you want to find any evidence of Central Asian genes in the North Indian populations, you must go back 12,500 years. So that is a very strong statement made by these people. One more interesting paper over here. The genetic differentiation began 6,000 years ago. So here, this Professor Ramaswamy Pichayappan took about 1,600 individuals from Tamil Nadu in different caste and tribal societies. And he showed that the genetic differentiation is 6,000 years old. It predates the so-called Aryan invasion theory by 2,000 years. This is very interesting to note. What he says is, in Tamil Nadu, if you're going to look for caste differentiation and marrying within communities, that incident happened almost 6,000 years ago. It did not happen with Aryans coming and chasing the Harappans down south and all those kinds of things. Here is a paper. Somehow my slides got mixed up. I apologize for that. So this is the conclusion from that earlier paper. They say that a recent study that searched for West Eurasian groups most closely related to ANI ancestors of Indians failed to find any evidence of shared ancestry between ANI and Central Asia within the past 12,500 years. A very strong conclusion from their paper. There's one more paper on evidence of outward migration. This is from 2013. And these people, what they did is they found skeletons in Syria, somewhere in Syria, dating back to the Roman period. And sorry, even earlier than that, dating back to 2500 BCE. So they studied the DNA of those records and they found this genetic affinity with northern India. So this is a very clear paper that shows that there is evidence of outward migration from India and going on almost up to Syria. This paper from Nature, I think this is 2014, this paper states that there have been several droughts in the Indian area. They talk about an 8.2 kilo-year event with a 300-year dry event, 5.9 thousand years ago, intense drought, 4.2 thousand years ago, 100-year severe drought caused the collapse of Mesopotamia and the migration out of Indus Valley. And the drying up of the Saraswati River happened around 3.9 thousand years ago by Savashka. And this paper over here clearly says this 200-year drought cycle doomed India's Indus Valley civilization. It is no invasion by Aryans or any such thing. It was the droughts that did them. I'd like to talk a bit about science. There are three cycles that I'd like to bring to your attention. They're called Milankovitch cycle after a Serbian scientist who discovered these in 1980. He didn't discover these things. What he did was he said these cycles can be correlated with climate change on Earth. So first thing he showed is this. There is a cycle that the Earth has. From a circular orbit, it goes to an elliptical orbit. From elliptical, it goes to circular. So this eccentricity has got a 100,000-year cycle. And notice that the amount of solar energy it gets is different as it goes through an elliptic or through a circular. There's a tilt cycle. The Earth's tilt can go from 22.2 degrees to 24.5 degrees. The greater the tilt is, the more solar energy the poles receive. There's a 41,000-year cycle. This last cycle is very important for us in the history of India. It's exceedingly important that we understand this. It's a 25,700-year cycle called the precession of equinox. So in this, what happens is, if the Earth is tilted at this particular angle, and it's rotating in such a way from west to east, so you have to think the sun is moving from east to west. So it does this once in 24 hours, right? So in addition to spinning like this, there is a slow wobble that goes like this. There's a very slow wobble that goes like this, and it takes 25,000 years to complete one such cycle. If you can imagine, if you played with the top as a child, the top spins very, very fast, but sometimes it's got a very slow extra movement, right? That is the wobble I'm talking about. The Earth is doing that wobble, and that wobble is a 25,700-year cycle. It's called precession of equinox. Very, very important for us. Some more artifacts that are found in India. All over India you find artifacts that are 38,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago. There are sites from northern India to southern India. It just shows that man has populated this land for an exceedingly long period of time. Some more artifacts, Bhimbetka, 35,000 years ago, some rock paintings over there. Those rock paintings also show a horse and a rider, and people who have read about the controversy of Indus Valley civilization having no horses, according to Michael Witzel and Steve Farmer, two very famous professors who attacked Professor Rajaram. You can see a proof over here. Bhimbetka, 35,000 years ago, was a horse, and not just a horse, but a horse with a rider, a domesticated horse. In Kerala, 9,000 years ago, Edakal cave, there are what appears to be evidence of writing and a connection with the Harappan civilization addition. Birana and Rakigar in Haryana are in the news right now because they have found that it is as old as 10,000 years ago. 10,000 years, that is a really long period of time. Ketavaram, Andhra Pradesh, 8,000 years, Ramachandrapuram, Telangana, 12,000 years. Now this is a map that I took to show the places that are named in our itihasas, in the epics and so on. Very clearly, the geography of India is a sacred geography because it's connected with the epics. There are so many stories, whether it's Kishkinda forest or wherever you take, whether it's in northern India or even going outside of India, there are places that are tied to the geography of the land along with some incident of the Puranas or our itihasas. So epics are deeply tied to the geography of the land, but unfortunately they are ignored as sources of history. And I'd like to show you this as a contrast. Let it sink for a few seconds. So in the mainstream narrative of Indian history, this is what they tell you. The first starting point is Indus Valley 5,000 years ago, declined 3.6 thousand years ago, and empty lands over here. So this clearly shows you that there's something very, very wrong in what we're studying in our textbooks, history textbooks. The evidence from genetics is just beating us left and right and saying, no, this is not right, this is rubbish. So the Aryan invasion theory is a failed theory. The genetic evidence shows great antiquity to Indian people. North African peoples are descended from Indian stock. There is no evidence of genes from Central Asia from 12,000 years ago. There is evidence of differentiation in caste more than, differentiation more than 6,000 years ago. There is no invasion. Climate change caused the collapse of the Indus Valley civilization, and we have ancient artifacts that predate the so-called Aryan invasion. So with that, my first set of evidence, I'd like to jump to the astronomical dating, where I'm talking of times from 25,000 years to, to 5,000 years ago. When we talk about Indian astronomy, we need to have some understanding of Nakshatra and Rashi. Nakshatra was a division of the sky which the ancient Indians did in 13 and 1/3 degree segments. So they would take, starting from the horizon over here, if there's a principal star that is there in that segment of the sky, they call it a certain name, that's a nakshatra name. Then the next 13 and 1/3 degrees, the next 13 and 1/3 and so on. And there are 27 such nakshatras. So from this eastern horizon to the western horizon, and also what they couldn't see below them. Remember, ancient man could only see what he could see here, he couldn't speculate what's below him, right? But these ancient Indians somehow knew that it is a circle, it's a globe. They were able to divide it in 360 degrees because 27 times 13 and 1/3 is going to give you 360 degrees. So this is an amazing thing. So we have several of the nakshatras over here. Here's a list of some of the nakshatras and a couple of ancient texts. This text is called Vedam Jyotisha and this is called Surya Siddhanta. These are two ancient texts and they have the same list of nakshatras in both of them. I just wanted to put it side by side to show that even if they're separated in time by thousands of years, they talk about the same thing. You have nakshatras like Kritika, Rohini and so on. These are the principal stars in the sky with which they're associated. The Eta Tauri, Alpha Tauri, for example, Revati here, the Eta Piscean, and so on. So here is something I'd like to put together to illustrate to you the night sky with an Indic lens. This is the night sky on February 21st, 2016. I hope you can see from back there. Do you see the center dot over here? So this one is Polaris, which is Drought. Remember I told you that when the Earth is at this axis and spinning over here, that star there appears to be constant in the sky, it is not moving. Right? That's Drought. It's stationary in the sky. But everything else appears to be going round through it. This is a tiny circle, the next one a bigger circle, the next one a bigger circle, and so on. That is shown over here. Do you see these circles from back then? So this star would do this circle over here, this star would make this circle, the Saptarishi would go on this circle, this Abhijit would go on this circle, and so on. So whenever Indians talked about nakshatra, it was always in relation to what segment of the sky was the moon when it arose over the eastern horizon. So this is the eastern horizon, this is east, north and west. This is the ground line. Okay? This is the ground line and this is the day sky, and let's say this is the night sky. Just imagine this, you have to imagine this a little bit. So the night sky, the day sky, and west, north and east. When the moon appeared over here on the eastern horizon, it was the Magha Nakshatra. So on 21st February, the nakshatra was Magha Nakshatra at 6 o'clock in the evening on 21st of February. So after that you also see several other nakshatras here, the Punarvasu and so on. I can't read some of them, Uttara Bhadrapada, Purva Bhadrapada, Dhanishta, Shravana and so on, all the way down to Kritika and so on. So you see this, there is a 360 degrees over here. Somehow the Indians knew that in addition to what they could see in the day sky, there are also things that you can't see in the night sky. Before I move on, I'd just like to call your attention to Abhijit. Okay? Abhijit is a star called Vega, V-E-G-A. So you observe that this is Druptara Polaris, and Abhijit is about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 circles away over here. How do we do any kind of dating with astronomy? There are four dates that are important in the Indian calendar. These are all the Shankrantis. The Shankrantis are also the equinoxes or the solstices. We have 2 equinoxes and 2 solstices. Because the earth is tilted at an angle, the sun does not rise in the east at the same point every day. Okay? So when the sun rises on the horizon, it may appear to go north, the next day it rises here, next day it rises here, next day it rises here, and so on. It goes to a northernmost point. Once it reaches a northernmost point, it appears stationary for little days, maybe 1 or 2 days, then it again starts retreating to the south. As it goes to the south, it comes to a midpoint, it appears to go very fast through the midpoint, till it goes to the southernmost point. At the southernmost point, it returns again. If you remember your Gita classes, you remember that there is a 6 months of the northward course of the sun, 6 months of the southward course of the sun. So it refers to this particular movement of the sun where it rises every day. So why was this important? On this solstice or this equinox or that solstice, if you knew where was the moon, which nakshatra was the moon on that solstice day, that's an important marker for astronomy, because we can work backwards and say when was such a combination true. So here, if somebody said Rama was born in Chitra Masa, it means the full moon was near the Chitra nakshatra. And 180 degrees, if the full moon is there, then the sun is 180 degrees away. So sun is an Ashwini nakshatra. If somebody said Varsha Ritu, which is the rainy season, began in Ashada Masa, then it means the full moon was in Ashada nakshatra, but the sun was in the Punarvashu nakshatra. And further, we know today, rainy season happens when the sun is in the Mriga nakshatra. That means there's a 2 nakshatra difference from the time this statement was written till the present time, because of this phenomenon of precession of equinox. Remember the precession that I talked about? Because of that, even the seasons, when the seasons happen, also happens to change because of the precession of equinox. The precession rate is 960 years per nakshatra. So that translates to 1920 years ago, the statement was true. The statement was written by Kalidasa in Meghaduta about 2000 years ago. So just from one statement from his book, we are able to date when was the book written. And this is the mechanism they used to do. Just a quick example to show you how things are done. The Kali Yuga is a very important marker for almost every Indian calendar. It's an absolute marker for Indian calendars. It's a rare planet conjunction of Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Mercury, Sun, Moon and Ketu near this Revati nakshatra. And we know from our calendrical systems, from the planetary software that we use, that it was on 18th February 3102 BCE. This marks the beginning of the Kali Yuga. The reference is from Surya Siddhanta, and I assimilated this in the software that I have. I put the date as February 18th, 3102 BCE, and lo and behold, This is the eastern horizon. Remember, this moon has got to appear on the eastern horizon. You see the sun, the moon, Jupiter, Mars, Mercury, all planets are clustered here close to the Revati Nakshatra. So it is amazing that all along you see these things, but suddenly you see these things jumping out at us over here. One more observation. There's an observation that Abhijit, remember the star Abhijit that I showed? When Abhijit was a pole star. In Mahabharata Vanaparva, there's a statement, a dialogue between Indra and Skanda. I will not read all these things. But the bottom line is, it says, the star Abhijit slipped down in the sky, and Kritika went to heat of the summer solstice, the heat of the summer. We know that Kritika was at summer solstice about 23.8 to 22.8 thousand years ago. Abhijit, we know, was a pole star 14,000 years ago. He will again become a pole star about 15,000 years later. The bottom line is, Indian sages have been observing the skies for 24,000 years, based upon the data points that we have over here. That's the only conclusion we can draw. I again simulated this date 14,000 years ago. What was the night sky like? And what you see is, remember I told you that star Abhijit, make a note of it, it's 5 cycles away. You see it now is at the center. So 14,000 years ago, because of precession of equinox, it was pointing at Abhijit. And now it is pointing at Polaris. So somebody has observed that that used to be the pole star and passed that information on generation by generation, and somebody has written that now it has fallen in the sky. Fallen in the sky meaning that it no longer is a pole star, but Abhijit is somewhere else. An amazing, amazing data. This is a Kritika Nakshatra. This is a picture that I took. I love to take astrophotography in addition. The Taittiriya Samhita refers to Kritika in the winter solstice, and that corresponds to a date of 8350 BCE. The Shatapada Brahmana refers to Kritika in the vernal equinox, that corresponds to 2950 BCE. Again, a couple of dates jumping out at us from the text. In the Mahabharata, the Bhishma Parva, there is a statement where Vyasa tells Dhritarashtra, my dear king, Arundhati, who is revered by the righteous all over the 3 worlds, has left her husband Vashishta behind. For a long time, this made no sense to most people. What does this mean? And this Facebook friend of mine, Nilesh Nilakant Oak, has written a book on this. And he says that October 16, 5561 BCE, which he claims is the date of the Mahabharata war. At that point, it was such that Arundhati was in the sky, appearing to be in front of Vashishta. Whereas today, if you see it, this is how it appears. Vashishta is in the front and Arundhati is behind, and this is a rotation. It goes like this in the night sky. Whereas at this time period, it used to go like this. Very interesting book, interesting data point over there. I think, I'm not sure how I'm doing on the time.
So there, this one, Arundhati was behind that.
Yes.
Is that the idea?
Yes. Arundhati Vashishta is a very famous star complex that Hindu married couples are asked to look at of the day of the marriage. They're supposed to take a look at it. The strange thing about this is, you cannot make out that it is a binary with a naked eye. You need a telescope to see it. I have taken pictures of this through a telescope. The naked eye can't make out. One more strange fact about Arundhati Vashishta is, most binary stars are gravitationally bound, and so they both co-orbit each other. One goes around the other. One star goes around the other. It's gravitationally bound, one goes around the other. But Arundhati Vashishta is very, very unique in that they are not gravitationally bound and they co-orbit each other. And so it's like an ideal human Hindu marriage, saying that the wife does not orbit the husband, but both need to take care of each other. I mean, it's an amusing thing. How am I doing in the time? Okay. So let me quickly race through. I have a lot to talk about. There are a lot of ancient texts. I don't want to talk much about this. Just that there's a whole lot of evidence of different kinds of works done by different authors in different time periods. I don't think I can talk anything over here, because to go into this I had to talk very deep. The Pancha Siddhantika was a commentary written by Varahamihira on different astronomical texts. In this, he talked about Pythagoras Siddhanta of Brahma, the Vashishta Siddhanta, the Romaka Siddhanta, Polisa, and the Surya Siddhanta. Now, this one, the Romaka Siddhanta, shows a 19-year cycle. And because it shows a 19-year cycle, the British Indologists said that the 19-year cycle was used by the Jewish people, and therefore it was a Babylonian invention, the Metonic cycle, and therefore Romaka Siddhanta probably copied from the Greeks. This is the kind of evidence they've used to claim these kind of things. The Pulisa Siddhanta refers to Yavanapura. The longitudes of Ujjain and Benares are given with respect to Alexandria. Because it is given with respect to Alexandria, they have said there's contamination with Egyptian knowledge. Very, very flimsy mechanisms are doing this. I'd like to quickly talk about occultation. Rohini and Chandra. Daksha had 27 daughters. And those 27 daughters he married off to the moon and they became the Nakshatras. And then Daksha found that the moon favors one wife over the others, and that's Rohini. And because of that, Daksha cursed the moon. And so it said in our Puranas, and nobody has a clue why that is so. But that's how it is over here. So here you see there's an occultation, there's the star Aldebaran. Aldebaran is Rohini. So Chandra is going, the occultation is just starting over here, April 10, 2016, 5:15 p.m. and ended at 6:30, where you can see that Aldebaran speaking out over here. When I studied this for connection with Metonic cycle, I found that occultations with Rohini are much more frequent than occultations with other nakshatras. Between 2015 to 2018, there are 51 occultations of Rohini by Chandra. As a correspondence,
What is occultations? What do you mean occultations?
occultation is when one heavenly body goes over another. So that's an occultation. So the last set of occultations of Nakshatra Kritika, which is the Pleiades, with Chandra in 2005 and 2009 resulted in just 26 encounters. The next set with Kritika will be in 2014. Note that there is a 19-year lapse between this and this. That will result in 18 encounters. So very clearly our ancient Indians have observed that Chandra often touches Rohini, but not the others. And that is encoded in the Puranic wisdom over there. That is one. That is one. Second one is they're also fully aware of a 19-year cycle. So to claim that the 19-year cycle is a Metonic cycle attributed to Babylons and Greeks is, I think, bogus, right over there. Because where the Indians were clearly aware of mappings of the night sky and nakshatras, to not have been aware of this fact is astounding. Okay, so I'm not even sure how much more I can say, Jaykumar, the remaining time. So Yanvakya, and the very famous sage Rishi from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad has got a cosmology that is amazingly accurate in terms of what is what. The only place where he got it wrong was the sixth one, where he said that the world of sun is wrapped in the world of Chandra. You can see that he said everything on earth is wrapped in water, and we know that is true. Water is wrapped in the air, that also we know is true. Air is wrapped in the sky, in space, we know that. And space is in the world of Gandharvas, which is the planets. And the planets are wrapped in the world of sun. And he said the sun is wrapped in the world of Chandra. That's the only one thing he got wrong there. The world of moon is wrapped in the world of stars, it's the nakshatras. The world of nakshatra, the world of devas, devas and Indra. And the Indras in the world of Prajapati, which is galactic center. And the world of Prajapatis wrapped in the world of Brahman. So it's an encoding of wisdom once again that everything is in Brahman, and that was his cosmology in those times. I will jump this. Jaykumar, how am I doing? 5 more minutes, okay. Okay, so let me talk about Surya Siddhanta. Surya Siddhanta has got a whole lot of things. In addition to the interesting information, it has got planetary diameters. It has got, for example, Mercury at 3008 miles, where the true figure is 3032 miles. Saturn at 73,000 miles, the true one is 74,000. Venus at 4,000, true 75. Jupiter 41,000, the true one is 86,000. You should pause now and say, what are you talking about? Surya Siddhanta, 700 BC, they knew that that blob of light over there is a planet, and they were able to estimate its size without telescopes. You should feel that awe right now, you should, because that's amazing. Because none of these things were known in Western Europe until Galileo invented the telescope, and much later, using differential calculus, they were able to figure out what is the size of some of those things. Much, much, much later. But here you are. They use trigonometry, very simple trigonometry. The Indians knew that on a full moon, if the moon is here, the sun is over here, they knew that the distance from the observer to the moon is 1, and the distance from here to the sun is 400. So they were able to estimate relative sizes. They had the mathematical smarts to do some of these kinds of things. With this, they were able to estimate certain things, and with the rate of change of the body in the sky, just like the nakshatra with 13 and 1/3 degree divisions, they had finer divisions inside each nakshatra to help them track the movement of the bodies. So they're able to make very fine tracking of bodies, time-based tracking, similar to differential calculus, and they're able to estimate some of these things. I think I will go to my final slide. I'm sorry that I don't have the time to say much else. I wanted to talk to you about knowledge transfers. It was the third area that I had. I talked to you about antiquity using genetics. I talked to you about antiquity using astronomy measurements. My third angle was to tell you about knowledge transfers. Just by examining the evidence of knowledge, how it went from society to society, we can make a case for antiquity of the Indian people again. For example, Pythagoras, and this is of Canada. I got the spelling right now. Canada. Sorry, I never pronounce this right for some reason. Canada. Democritus. Canada around 600 to 800 BCE, and Democritus around 460 BCE. Vaisheshika Sutra. He said, understand Brahman through understanding the natural world, 9 classes of reality and infinity. Creation is made up of atoms, atoms pervade material. And he talked about the particularity of substances. So it was, I shouldn't even be telling it to you all, because you all study these things much deeper than I do. On the other hand, Democritus, who is called the father of modern science, we know he traveled to Asia, India, Ethiopia, and returned to Greece with something called natural philosophy. He said creation is made up of atoms of different types that degenerate. 2 kinds of knowing. One is legitimate with intellect and illegitimate with sense objects. He said Earth is a sphere, universe is made up of atoms and chaos colliding to make bigger worlds. When you see things like this and we try to impose on them the bedrock of what we understand from the understandings on this side of the world, we see very clearly there's been a borrowing of ideas that has gone from one sphere to the other. Alexander's time, some more, we know that Alexander ordered translations of astronomical works in Persian Mesopotamia for his uncle Aristotle, which were transmitted to Hipparchus in 190. So Hipparchus, we know, said several things which were also said earlier by Vidya or Pingala. Sorry, I don't have the time to say much more on this. Ptolemy, recent book that says that Ptolemy's work was fabricated, and this person, Robert Newton, 1985, calls him a liar and a plagiarist. He says that he got all of his information from Eratosthenes, who lived in 275 BCE. Eratosthenes was the chief librarian at Alexandria. Alexandria, we know, facilitated information exchange from the east to the west. So there's a lot of information over there. So let me jump through all of these things and talk to you just a little bit over here. Just one more minute. Just one minute. Okay. So I have not talked to you in great detail, but if I had a little more time, I'd have made a strong case that Indic knowledge was transferred to the Greeks and the Romans. I just told you one with Democritus and others. When Greeks were defeated in 145 BCE by the Romans, and the Romans adopted Christianity in 325 or so current era. And once they did that, the Pope ordered the destruction of all the old libraries in Greece and so on. So much of this Indian Greek knowledge was destroyed in Europe. But one more strain of that knowledge existed in the Arab lands, in Syria, Lebanon, Beirut, all those areas which are not touched by Christianity, at least not that much. Orthodox Christianity, but not that much. That survived. That knowledge, along with Indic knowledge, was taken by the Muslims, translated into Arabs. The Muslims are consolidators of information. So they got a lot of information, consolidated them, and they were scientists in their own right. They had 2 different texts, they were able to understand a lot more. That information was transmitted to Europe in Latin, and here is one such thing, transmission to Europe in the Toledo School of Translation. In Spain, when Muslim knowledge was being injected into Muslim Spain, in Christian side of Spain, in Toledo, there were monks whose only job was to translate Arabic into Latin. And we know that Gerard of Cremona translated 87 books in math, astronomy and medicine. And this formed the bedrock of European knowledge going into Renaissance. So there are other evidence of European knowledge. These are some travelers who came to India and took some work, especially if you take a look at Jordanus Catalani, the first bishop of Roman Catholic Diocese in Colon. Some more 14th century travelers, 15th century travelers. We know all the information that these different people took. Nicola di Conti, Alfonsi Nicton, obviously Vasco da Gama and these people, Bartholomew Dias. 1500s, we know the Portuguese had come into India and started much of their missionary work as well as taking information and so on. This Frias is in Lisbon overlooking the sea because they got their knowledge from the sea. These scientists, Pedro Nunes and I cannot even pronounce it, Joao de Castro, the fourth viceroy to India, it shows them over there. But these are all people who were able to take the knowledge from India and utilize it in their systems. Colonial period, every colonial occupier was a person who would take some information of the other from India. So there's a lot of plagiarism, in India, which led to the Renaissance. After the Spanish Inquisition in 1498, any Muslim work was seen as seeking knowledge from Satan, and that would invite savage retribution in those days in Western Europe. So the Renaissance scholars promptly hid their sources and passed off the Greek and Indian works as original knowledge. I'm not saying that's all they did. They built upon these works, but where they got that work from, they could not attribute it, because if they attributed it, their lives were in danger. So there's a lot of plagiarism that happened over there. So we are in a situation where we understand Sanskrit was a language of knowledge generation from the Rig Vedic period onwards. In 10th century onwards, Islamic invasion of India destroyed temples, libraries, killed Brahmins, converted the masses, and led to severe disruption of Sanskrit and ascendancy of Persian as a preferred language in India. But still Sanskrit survived in the countryside and village side, where people would bequeath a part of the earnings to the temple, and the village temple would support some kind of teacher who would teach the children and so on. Sanskrit survived in Pathashalas and other things in that way. 18th century onwards, the British taxation was such that they taxed the farmers so heavily that he couldn't afford to give that portion of income to the temples anymore. So along with the taxation, they also made English as the preferred language for employment. So that led to complete loss of public support to Sanskrit, replaced by English. So our isolation from our Indic knowledge systems began in the 10th century, accelerated in the 18th century, and was finally sealed in 1950 India, when in the Nehru government, the Joint Parliamentary Commission on Sanskrit had several recommendations on the use of Sanskrit in India, and was defeated in the Congress, and the rejections, they were all thrown out. Recently, in the Manmohan government, there was one more a second Joint Parliamentary Commission on Sanskrit, and they voted that we will study Sanskrit, but with the objective of seeing how did it cause social problems in India. So you can see that the thing has changed. Today our isolation and loss is complete. Sanskrit scholarship exists for the most part outside India, and its past and future narratives are controlled from outside India. One example is Sheldon Pollock in Colombia. So I think I come to the end. I thank you very much for your patience. I'm sorry I've not been coherent enough to speak all the details. There's simply not enough time. But those are the concluding remarks that I have.
Thank you very much, Raj. We do have time for questions. Swamiji had suggested 10 minutes to 15 minutes. Of course, it's a bit late today, but any questions out there? Raj, you mentioned Red Indians. The Indians migrated and all the way up there. Now, they were called Red Indians because it was known that they came from India, or it was just coincidental?
Columbus thought he had reached India. Columbus thought he reached India. And so they thought the people living there were Indians. And so eventually, because of the skin tone, I guess they became Red Indians.
So, precision equinox you talked about. The precision equinox you talked
Yes.
about. What is it? It's very important for India. What is the implication?
The precision of equinox. So the question was, why is it important in the study of Indian history? The precision of equinox, like I said, is a very slow wobble that takes 26,000 years to complete. It takes 26,000. Because of that, the relative position of the nakshatras and where they appear at what period of time, that changes. So if somebody said that Kritika nakshatra was in the vernal equinox at a certain period of time, we can work backwards and say, because of precession of equinox, where would it have been at that period of time? That's how we know the Shatapada Brahmana, it was in around 3000 BCE, whereas in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, it was in a different time period. So, very important because it helps us to have a fixing of the night sky. It helps us to fix something in time. It's not enough to say January 21st. The question will be which year. Then if I say the year 2016, they'll say 2016 with respect to what? With a common era. So I need some kind of an absolute reference. So this precision of equinox allowed one additional data point to fix the time when things would have happened. Yes?
Columbia University chair, chaired by Sheldon Pollack, that's approved by or in some way discussed with Sringeri Matham.
Yes. Recently I heard that the Sringeri Matham had had funded a chair, and that was also with Sheldon Pollack as one of the professors over there. I'm not aware of the status now. I know that a lot of people in social media, they were upset about this and talked about it, how the Adhikara has gone out of Sanskrit. So even Rajiv Malhotra has done a lot of work on this at this time. I'm not very sure what the status now is. I have one behind, one coming. Yes.
What are you doing for making this knowledge public? I believe right now it stays with people who are studying or who are doing research. Like for a layman, this is still lacking big. What are you doing for that?
So I can only speak for what I'm doing. So I've seen it as my swadharma. My swadharma is, if I've learned a little bit over here, if I believe this to be true, I made it my job to go and tell to who will listen. So this time in my trip to India, I have 5 talks lined, and this is the second one. Day before yesterday, I talked in Kochi on the same subject, 90 minutes. 90 minutes, Jayakumar. And I talked here today. I'll be in Bangalore on 18th, and I'll talk in Mysore. So every visit to India, I'm hoping to talk. In the US also, I talk wherever I'm invited about this subject. A couple of people have strongly recommended that I write a book, but I don't believe my knowledge is good enough to write a book. So I'm just at the level of trying to awaken people's eyes by presenting this evidence. I hope eventually to write a book.
It will remain to you only. I mean, as a group of people who are doing research in this area, can they not do something tying up with the government of India and do something?
It is certainly worthwhile to think of it that way, but right now the government of India has outsourced the whole thing to the Marxist historians. Even though we have a BJP government, they have not done anything to remove the Marxists from power who do these things. So right now it's the outsiders like me I'm not even a historian. So I talked a little bit to Professor Subhash Kart, with Professor Vamsi Jaruri. I also talked with scholar Vedam Arya. I just talked to Vedam Arya, who mentioned that we should probably all get together and try to have a critical mass where we can maybe make these voices heard more. I requested him to set the momentum in place so we can do that. Yes.
I understand that there cannot be political objectivity about these things, but you are presenting, the way you presented it is really like is a facts which are more scientific and appears very accurate.
Yes.
So the science community, or the global science community, why, I don't know whether they are rejecting or accepting, but if it is objectively presented,
Right.
so they have no reason to reject this.
That is my hope.
To reject their previous mistake.
So the question was, because this talk appears to be scientifically based, so is there a reluctance in people to accepting it? I mean, these are facts. These are not opinion or any such things. They appear to be facts. So shouldn't this be accepted? I hope so. The answer is I hope so. So I try to say, if I say something, I hope there is proof behind. I try to research a little bit, and only if I'm a little convinced, then maybe I go over there. The idea is that, yes, we are afraid of criticism. If people criticize us, they'll criticize the smallest point and completely deride you on that. They delegitimize every research you've done based on a simple mistake that you might do. So we have to be extra careful in some of these things of what we're doing. So yes, that's why I say I'm not ready yet to write a book. I'd like to make sure that understand everything carefully. Everything can be defended to the core, and we do it. But I completely agree that we have to have scientific validation of these narratives, and that is what our group IHAR is doing. We are using scientific validation of some of these things.
there was a BBC a documentary in which they have presented that the genetic markers of, they were looking for an ancient genetic marker and it appeared to be south of India. And also they pointed out that predating the language, some of those sounds which they made are still existing in some parts of south of India. So there's a documentary out there like that.
Yes, so the question is about the documentary of BBC that talks about ancient sounds as well as the genetics. So I think the work that you're referring to is Michael Woods. Michael Woods is a scholar who's done some work on some of these things. He's made a lot of speculations. There are some speculations. Michael Woods has continued the tradition of Romila Thakur. He has completely negated the Indic tradition. The Indic tradition does not exist for him. Saraswati does not exist for him. Satellite evidence does not exist for him. So straight away says that's all myth, and he goes on. He says he found a chariot in Central Asia, and therefore the Aryan invasion route was through that. So they don't even want to acknowledge that genetic evidence is staring at them in the face. So I'm not very sure how much credibility to give to BBC, because I don't believe in that. Yes, please.
Can you say anything about the dating of the Sanskrit language based on your research?
Once again?
Can you say anything about the dating of the Sanskrit
Oh
language?
no, I'm sorry, I'm not qualified at all. I'm not qualified in linguistics or the dating of Sanskrit language at all. One of the questions that I try to answer very much to myself is to say, how is it that if you have ancestral North Indian, ancestral South Indian, could we have had the so-called Proto-Dravidian and the Proto-Sanskrit existing side by side? We know that there's a very ancient substrata in the languages where they're borrowed from each other. But beyond that, I'm not a scholar at all, so I don't know. My speculation is they existed side by side, they borrowed side by side, and they developed in that manner.
Thank you very much, Raj, once again, and it's been a pleasure to hear you to give us, who are very not knowledgeable at all about this topic, you've shown us that there is a gulf between what we think, what you think is the reality, and what's being presented, and we do hope you can see there's a lot of interest. How is that gap going to get narrowed? And we do have the blessings of Puja Swamiji and our Acharyas, and I'm sure your work will be very successful.